Nothing is more important than the children sitting in front of me, because I've made a promise and a commitment to them, just like I have to my own children, to give them an exceptional education and care for them and love them as I would my own. And it meant that even on my very, very worst day, I had to put everything else aside, including adult interest, and just say, what does this child in front of me need? Because if I don't do my job today, this kid doesn't get what they need 10 years from now, and that's unacceptable.
Today's guest is Dr. Penny Lee Schwinn, Senior Advisor at Emerson Collective, an organization that invests in entrepreneurs and innovators tackling complex challenges in education, immigration, the environment, and beyond. Previously, Penny served as Tennessee's Commissioner of Education from 2019 to 2023, where she led the restructuring of the state's $9 billion school funding system. Penny is also the recipient of Lee's 2026 Courageous Leader Award, recognized for her commitment to supporting students through expanded learning opportunities and access to the resources they need to succeed. And now, live from Lee's 2026 Courageous Leadership Conference, here are your hosts, Mildred Otero and Taylor Stewart.
Hello, and welcome to a live recording of the Leaders Table. We're not here to talk about titles or CVs, but to explore the moments that have shaped a leader. It's those moments, raw and real experiences, that don't always make it to the headlines. My name is Mildred Otero, and I'm the president of Lee.
And I'm Taylor Stewart, and I'm the vice president of platforms here at Lee. It is always my pleasure to be here with Mildred and be here with an amazing guest. But today is special because we get to record this one in front of a live audience of Lee's senior leaders here at our Courageous Leadership Conference. So this is a wonderful culmination of this year's podcast season.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Today we're sitting with Dr. Penny Lee Schwinn, Senior Advisor at the Emerson Collective and former Commissioner of Tennessee. I'm so excited for this conversation. Thank you for being here, Penny.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Penny, we always say we like to begin at the beginning here at the podcast. So let's start with your roots. Where did you grow up, and how did that place shape who you are today?
So I am born and raised in the great blooming metropolis of Sacramento, California, top of the breadbasket in California. And I was raised predominantly by a single mom who was a teacher, and she taught at Del Paso Heights Elementary, almost predominantly in room 16 for almost 40 years. Del Paso Heights is a community that is rich in a lot of things, just not money, and just lots of changing demographics over the time that I was there. But it was the most seminal moment of my life, especially as a young person, because she was on year-round education. So we would come with her in the summer, and there's no break in my family, so there was no real summer. But I remember being in fourth grade when she was teaching fourth grade, and her students couldn't read. And I was reading chapter books and all sorts of other things. And my two dear friends, Oshalon and Willie, we would play outside and recess, and then we'd come in, they would do basic phonics, and I was doing something else. And so that's where she explained the achievement gap to me when I was young, and to my younger sister. And we both didn't understand it. We both were frustrated by it, even as young children, and both of us went into public education as a result. And I say that that's who I am and where I'm from. There's lots of other things that are wonderful about Sacramento, but my entire life was destined to become an educator. She taught me that. My biological father, her first husband, was in foster care, homeless for most of his life. They met in college. And so to see the have and have not even within my own family, and then to see that in the school that I went to, which was a Title I school. We moved, I went to a different school in a different community, but to just live a life of haves and have-nots and what that means for outcomes for you as a human being when you are the same as anybody else with the same potential, stuck with me. And I deeply believe that education is the way to solve that very, very real problem that should not exist for any child.
Thank you so much for that. As you were answering, I was hearing a few different kind of identities come up, from educator to Sacramentan. Can you tell me a little bit about who are those identities that are really important for people to know about you? Who are you, and how you describe that in a few different words?
I mean, so mom is the most important identity. I think I have 3 children. Like I said, my favorite book growing up was Anne of Green Gables. I read it every Christmas, and I have for a while. We don't need to say how long. But it's because the whole book is actually about a young girl who was in the foster care system, and when she got a loving home and a great education, the entire world opened up to her. And so when I think about myself as a mom, 2 of my kids are adopted by choice. I have a Memphian. I adopted my first year as a commissioner. Not sure I would recommend that, but, and then my first daughter, I adopted my first year as a principal, opening a charter school in the neighborhood near where I grew up, where there was 6% proficiency in reading. And it was about all kids just need love and support and opportunity. And if you give them a chance, they'll step up and rise to it. So mom is the first. I would say I still write educator on every form because that's who I am. But more than anything, I hope that I'm someone who's always student and child focused. And that is the core of how I live my life. It's how I raise my kids, and it's what I hope the people around me also believe.
People often have surprising sides. What's something about you that most folks don't expect?
Aside from being very clumsy, my middle daughter is also very clumsy. We walk into the same wall. It's just like very predictable. But I don't think people expect, I really am a Californian at heart. And so I think like I've had the great opportunity to work in big states, small states, red state, blue states, very Dr. Seuss kind of a pathway, but I'm a Californian. So it's really about kind of a little bit easygoing in my personal life. I'm kind of a spaz. I love flip-flops, jeans, and sunglasses on my head. I think that's like the national uniform up in Northern California. But it really is about family. And I think more than anything, people know me in the professional space, and I'm pretty tough. I can be pretty tough, but ultimately, I love building a fort with my kids and reading under it. I love going outside, and I love finding some kind of balance for myself.
I love that. So we're going to move into some questions on some defining moments in your leadership. So let's start with that broadly. Is there a moment in your life that when you look back, it feels like it approaches like, this is my style of leading, and I can mark it back to that moment?
So I started a public charter school, Capital Collegiate, in 2012. And it was because I'd gone to a school, Isidore Cohen Elementary School. It was a Title I school, but I was bused to that school because it had a full-time GATE program. But even then, like, we did not do math at all when I was in 3rd grade. They said, you will learn it on your own. And my math book was empty all year. And so my mom's an educator, and so she had enough social capital, even though she's a single mom as a teacher. We moved to a different community 10 miles up the road, and I had a completely different set of opportunities. But I never forgot the students that I went to school with. And of that class of allegedly, 30 brilliant children, that is true and a fact. The only students who really kind of quote unquote made it were those who transferred out. And that's unacceptable because all of them were smart, all my friends, wherever they went to school, frankly. And so I wanted to build a charter school back in that neighborhood, in that general area, and give my friends' children a different opportunity. And that was really, really hard. But I think it defined who I was as a leader because California, it wasn't necessarily a super charter-friendly space at the time. We had incredibly low funding for a high-cost state. I was a very, very young leader, and I also decided to run for school board right around that same time. But it told me who I was because no matter what challenge happened, it was never too big. It forced me to define who I was in terms of nothing is more important than the children sitting in front of me because I've made a promise and a commitment to them, just like I have to my own children, to give them an exceptional education and care for them and love them as I would my own. And it meant that even on my very, very worst day, I had to put everything else aside, including adult interests, which is not just something you can either say it or you can do it, and those are very different things, and just say, what does this child in front of me need? Because if I don't do my job today, this kid doesn't get what they need 10 years from now, and that's unacceptable. It was a level of grit, sometimes hardness and toughness with other adults, but it was a defining moment in terms of how I think about my work and its impact.
Well, we are here recording live at the Courageous Leadership Conference. So I do want to ask a question that I think hopefully many in the audience also have. Public service is a big word. What does it mean for you? And if you had a chance to give one piece of advice to someone on that journey, what would it be?
You're either in public service because you care about your constituents and the good that you want to do, but there are a lot of people who are in it for themselves. And you can't really have both. And so part of the biggest challenge for me along the way is that the biggest principle is know your North Star And it doesn't really matter where you're doing it. If you know your North Star and you know your limits and your boundaries and you know where you're trying to get to, then everything else is noise. And that means that sometimes you have to work with people that you don't agree with. Sometimes it means you have to work for people you definitely don't agree with. And sometimes it means you're in a situation where everyone around you is kind of against you and doesn't like what you're doing, doesn't like who you are, doesn't like where you're from, whatever it might be. But none of those are reasons why you do the work. You do the work because you care deeply about what it is you're trying to achieve for the group of people that you are there to serve. And so for me, that has allowed me to work in a small, very blue state like Delaware, to moving to a very large red state like Texas and medium like Tennessee. Totally different politics, completely different politics. But I've worked for Democrats and Republicans, and ultimately my test is, are you either aligned with what I think needs to happen for kids? And if we're not aligned, are you gonna let me go do my job? And then you can do yours, and maybe ne'er the two shall meet, but I need to be able to do what's best for kids. And I think if you have a North Star and you stick to it, no matter what, even when it's hard, even when there's bloggers and bad press and people literally throwing things at you, if you know that what you're doing counts for your constituents, and for me, my constituents are children, they're not adults, then it doesn't really matter. You should be able to do that work anywhere, and you cannot get it done unless you bring in everybody. And I think that is an incredibly hard lesson to live, and a principle that if you don't do that, then you don't have staying power with all the blood, sweat, and tears you're giving to your work.
So part of what's hard about public service is that it's not this linear path where it's like it's all progress, everything is going fine, because if it were, everybody would do it, and we wouldn't talk about it being hard, and we wouldn't talk about courage.
Yeah.
So let's talk about something that's a little hard, of failure on the other side of public service. Obviously, failure is a tough teacher.
It is.
But an effective one. Can you share a time where failure has really shaped you?
The hardest part about being in public service is that you don't always feel like you have the grace to fail, to be able to operate with the humility to acknowledge, here's where I failed, here's why, here's what we're doing differently. Because right now in public service, the turnaround time is so small that like just minor infraction becomes some giant campaign online, and now you're dealing with messaging around a failure versus solving the problem and getting better and helping other people to learn from it. And there's no tolerance for being human. And I think it prevents a lot of people, like young people that I talk to who are aspiring into public service, they're afraid, because you see the vitriol online of people you will never meet who know nothing about the hard decisions you need to make. And it's really, really challenging. So I think two that come to mind, both are when I was a commissioner in Tennessee. One was on opening schools. We opened schools very, very early. I don't think we communicated effectively about why, because most of the state wanted to. It was a politically popular decision, but that's not why we made it. We had to look at, it was actually the hardest day of my professional life, because we had to decide what to do. I'm not a doctor. I'm not trained in medicine at all, making these massive decisions for other people's children and families. And the hardest professional day, one of two, was having to sit in a room and tell the governor how I was thinking about the decision. And the way I thought about it was we went to all the hospitals and we looked at the child mortality rate in the summer when school wasn't open, and then compared it to what we thought was going to be true in schools. And that is the most morbid thing to have ever happened. Just to talk about, well, more kids are going to drink Drano or play in the street. But that was the level of difficult that we were dealing with, and we didn't communicate that well to folks who were really struggling with that decision. It became more about the politics and less about all of the data and thinking that went into it, about we're trying to protect people with imperfect information. Communication for different audiences was a big lesson there. The second big lesson is the one that, if you could probably Google on a couple of websites, and they will say how much that was a failure of leadership. But during the pandemic, I had a student named Anthony when I was a principal. And Anthony was not fed over the weekends, and he was locked in a closet. And we called many times, and that was never changed. And I remember on Fridays, we would go to Anthony and we would just stuff his backpack, his pockets, just with as much food as we could for the weekend. And then I would just say, baby, you just got to get till Monday. You just got to get till Monday. And that was the whole thing, because he would just be panicked. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying that to him every Friday for years. And so during the pandemic, for me, it was, well, what if Monday doesn't come? Like Monday wasn't coming for too many kids. And I just thought of him, and we did something called the Child Wellbeing Task Force, trying to figure out how do you support families who rely on school services, whether or not folks agreed that you should rely on school services, which is a big conversation in Tennessee, but kids get fed at school, and that's real.
Yeah.
And we went about that, and I thought I had done it the right way. And there were just, it was a failure because I did not manage my team well enough to be able to understand enough of the politics and the scope to edit through intent. And again, communication, it made it seem like we were gonna go, walk in monitor homes and things like that. And that absolutely blew up very, very publicly and stays with me to this day as a massive failure of leadership. And for me, it was intent is one thing, implementation and execution is another. And so if you do not communicate both what you intend to do, why you're trying to do it, varied to all of the different audiences that you have to communicate with, and there are about 32 different audiences the state chief has, then it doesn't matter whether or not you're going to implement it well. You're never going to get it done, and it's just going to turn up to blow up in your face. But the lesson I learned from that failure is that the most important thing I can do is defend my team and stand up for my team. So no one will ever know who made those mistakes, because I made those mistakes. I was the leader. If I'm going to get yelled at by Congress, which very publicly has happened, then that's my failure, because I run that team. My biggest job is to be the center and kind of block and tackle, and I'm also the quarterback. And leadership is having to do both and own failure, but it's not just your own, it's of your team, because those are your people. But those were two very public failures, and I think of them as failures because I wanted to help kids. The intent was good, the intent was there, the execution was poor.
Those are some important lessons, Penny. Thank you for sharing them, because I think many in this room can definitely resonate with what you are sharing. During the last few days, we've been talking a lot about some of the values that drive our leadership, and sometimes recognizing that those values can also sometimes be in tension with each other. And it sounds like you are navigating multiple things in those examples. And I'm just curious, if you think about those moments where you've been pulled in different directions on your values, how did you as a leader navigate that tension? How were you as you were navigating those situations? And lessons, not just about how you handled it, and it sounds like you're, right, like you take responsibility, all those things sound, but what did Penny do to take care of Penny in those moments?
Oh, God. I would say every role I've been in, there have been real tensions between, and a lot of them just because of the nature of the state chief role, they do tend to be political, and that is what it is. And part of it is you work harder. When you're under stress, you can have bite. And so learning to manage the bite of the stress and pressure and intensity that you're under to be able to support a team that's also under stress, intensity, and pressure is really, really difficult. So how do you, I think, in retrospect, how do you take time and give yourself some space to be human? I think is really important. I think some of the hardest days were knowing that I was going into a committee hearing where I was just going to get obliterated. I was going to get the bill passed, but it was going to be messy and ugly. And sometimes that's the negotiation. Ahead of time, they tell you ahead of time, we are just going to take you down 25 pegs and then 25 pegs more. And that's the cost of getting my yes vote. And it was like, okay, great. Like, I'll just be those clowns. You just they bounce and you come back up smiling and you come back down and you come back up smiling. And it's just, if that's what you got to do. But in those moments, there are two things that I do personally. There was a student named Sean. He was my first student. He was 4, naughty little boy. He spent a lot of time with me in the principal's office. His mom told me, I'm giving you my baby. And it was this moment of me understanding the responsibility and the weight of taking someone else's child and giving them an education. And it was my daughter. I just had her. And there's a picture of Sean reading to Ellie in my office. I adopted her. She was born in Lodi. So they kind of raised Ellie with me. And I keep that picture because I never lose focus of the promise and commitment that I made to Deshawn, his mother. And I said, I'm going to give Sean the best education I possibly can and commit to him just like I would my own daughter, who was a baby, an infant at the time. I keep a picture of them and for the same frame, and I will never move that. So before I go into a tough committee hearing, before I go into a situation that I know is going to test every one of my values, the way that I stick to it is knowing that my North Star is you do what's best for kids no matter what, even when it's hard. And sometimes that's the jobs you agree to take, frankly, and sometimes that is the way that you do your job. But I look at a picture of Ellie and Sean, I mean, that's what I do for my grit. And then for me as a human being, I don't think very many people know this, I dance. And so before every,
There was dancing happening here in this conference as well.
my team hated it, but before any hearing, I was in the US Senate and they have a little green room. And I always play what I consider to be music that my adversaries will hate. And so we play music and whoever's in the room with me, it's just like, you got to dance it out. And so we will just dance. And so I've played everything from Lizzo to Morgan Wallen, depending on who, and everything in between. Just trying to figure out, like, because you get the wiggles out, and dancing brings joy and endorphins. And so there was my very last hearing, they didn't have sometimes I go in the bathroom and we would play music, and then my chief of staff would stand outside the door and say it's broken. 'Cause she's like, oh God, please nobody see the commissioner dancing. I love that. And there was no place to go. And so they were like, well, what are you gonna do? And I was like, well, we're sticking some headphones in. And right outside of the hearing room door, I was sitting there dancing, having a great old time. And my go-to song, because you said yours, is the Beatles' Twist and Shout. Because there's just something like very old school and like uplifting about that. And I was just dancing away, having a great time. And they were just trying to block me. And I was like, I'm 6'1" in heels. Like, there's nothing you can do. That's something I do for myself, because ultimately you get the little jiggles out, and you can just really focus. It clears everything away. And I go in the room and I just say to myself, Lee Schwinn, Sean Harper. That's what I'm doing it for. My kids and other people's children who I should love and protect like my own. Every time.
When did that practice start? When did you start dancing?
So my family were dancers. They're all teachers. We're either educators, nurses, firefighters, or police officers. We are public servants. That is what we do. That's our family business. I'm very, very proud of that. But we are big dance party people. So my kids and I also do that at home. So we do that at least twice a week. It's just like if someone had a bad day, a bad test, sad, any kind of emotion, celebration, we turn on our little Alexa and we just go to town. And my mom raised me like that. I think she's single mom, teacher salary, lots of stress. We had some pretty hard financial times and needed some help. She would just say, you either go for a jog or you do a dance, but you need to do something that gets your body moving and your heart lifted and smile on your face. And so I've been doing that, and I teach my kids to do that. But I just think that in your hardest moments, you should laugh every single day in your job. You should laugh every single day. Something's funny. Sometimes it's like sad funny, but it's funny. And I'm very grateful that I have, that's the Californian in me. There's a lot of joy in everything, every little moment.
Okay, so the dance has been the consistent practice.
Oh yeah.
And it comes through your family.
Yeah.
What's something new that you're learning, or it could be about your leadership, it could be about yourself, but what's a newer practice or something new you're learning?
So I've never been good at self-care, because I was in that camp that was just like, I don't believe in it.
Yeah.
And that was because I didn't know how to do it. And so it was like, well, you just work harder. And it was that there was that time period for a long time where a lot of us, it was this competition of who could work more hours and who was the most tired and who had the hardest placement. Leaving the commissioner role and looking back, I've had so much more time with my own kids. I've had more time with friends and family. I've had more time to think about my work. And how I approach it and how I want to help my colleagues who are my closest friends or commissioners and superintendents. I think self-care means different things for different people, but identifying something that every day makes you smile. I do a gratitude journal, and I think about what is one thing today that, like, if this is my last day, I will be really happy to have done. And some days it's just, I now live on 4 acres on a hill, so I'm like, no one can find me. That is my gift. But I have deer, and I post about my deer, and I name them, and it's like a very random thing. But no matter what, at least one day I get up at 5:36 with my daughter, my middle daughter. She's an early riser, God bless her. And we have coffee or tea. She has tea. And we just sit and watch our deer and read. And it is the most beautiful tradition that I get with her. And all of my kids have a little bit of a different tradition, and it's just been a total gift that I didn't give myself when I was a commissioner. I just didn't feel like I had the time.
That's beautiful, Penny. I think a lot of people in this room will resonate with that as well. Self-care is a thing that a lot of leaders are working on, and how do we incorporate those things into our lives? I just want to move us a little bit around people that have influenced us. Sometimes we have mentors or people in our lives that have helped to guide us, but I want to focus that question specifically around, as a senior leader, everyone in this room, yourself included, we are making tough decisions. who is a leader that you go to speak with that helps you when the path is not clear? And what are the things that you've learned from this person?
A number of people have done that for me. Ed Manansala in Sacramento, he's the superintendent in El Dorado County right now, taught me how to lead. You don't just get respect because you're a leader, you earn it. And he taught me a lot about that, the grace and humility of that. And I do not live up to his expectations or what I know he would hope for me more often than not. But I think about him a lot in terms of he's the most graceful, humble person I know. Mark Murphy was the secretary in Delaware, and he is incredibly thoughtful. So he taught me about even when you're busy, you find time to read and grow and learn and exercise your brain. Mike Morath, his brain works like a computer. So he just taught me how to think about how to use my brain in a way where I don't have to be shy about moving fast, that you can actually create systems that allow you to move fast. Governor Lee, love him or hate him, he always said, trying to just keep you between the ditches, Penny, just trying to keep you between the ditches. He has a deep belief in his faith. He's not a politician. But he has a deep belief in his faith, and he does not waver from that. And he's the most predictable person I've ever worked for because I know exactly who he is, how he makes decisions, and what he believes. And I know when he's doing something he doesn't want to do. And he's had to do a couple of those things very recently. But he has taught me how to stick with things and what it means to have someone have your back. I never worried about, I could lead the way I wanted to in Tennessee because I knew that what his lines were, and that freedom was really important in leadership. And then I would say most recently, because I want to give credit, because I've been very lucky. I call my state chief friends, I call my superintendent friends, but Arnie Duncan and Margaret Spellings have been very important to me in the last 18 months in particular. They've always been very good to me, but they've been very important to me in pushing me to do things that maybe I was reticent to do. Maybe challenging me a little bit about what it means to be about kids and only kids, and that other people's opinions about your decisions aren't what matters, because then you can be a great martyr and look at yourself in the mirror, but you just let 50 million kids down. And pushing me when to know what my lines were. And I think those conversations where it's not them putting either of their beliefs, because they don't, obviously different parties, not putting those on me, but really helping me to think for myself about, this is my line, and this is my opportunity, and here's how I can be good with myself on that. And that was a great gift that they both continue to give me regularly. I'm very grateful for both of them.
I want to dig into that a little bit more on this idea of lines. So how do you know when you're getting things right, when this is my line, I'm within it, I'm doing the things I want to do? How do you measure success for you?
Is this going to move the ball forward for kids having a different set of opportunities than they otherwise would have? And is this as far, as fast, and as hard as we could push to do that? And if it's not, then what is the give and take? If we pushed harder, what are we losing? And sometimes you could push harder, but you're going to give up way too much. And then it's not going to be sustainable, for example. So knowing what that max kind of gas pedal is. If I'm not at max gas pedal, I don't feel great. And everybody knows it, because I'm not shy about explaining how I feel. But that max gas pedal is a really big line. And I think for me, and this is, candidly, this is being challenged in lots of parts of our country across, no matter what the state is. But what are our values about children? Not about adult politics, but about child politics. And I have a very deep belief that if a child has a pulse, a child goes to school if that's what they're doing, you know what I mean? But you don't prevent kids from going to school. They're children. And that was something where your gut, I have a deep belief in gut. And sometimes you don't have a definitive line, but if you're about to do something and you just don't feel great about it, it's a warning flag. And for me, that gut is, can I go home and tell Ellie? Ellie's my eldest, she's 14, going into high school next year. Could I look Ellie in the eye and say, Mommy's proud of what she did? If I can't, it's not the right decision for me. And the biggest lesson is that sometimes you sacrifice a lot to do the right thing for kids, knowing what you're going to personally lose. I've learned that lesson over the last 18 months, the easy way and the very hard way. And sometimes you have to do the right thing for kids and know that means stepping out of leadership, because you can't look your own kid in the eye or anyone else's kid and say that what you're doing is the right thing. And I think both of those I've learned, especially the last 10 years, no matter where it's been, but those are two particularly prescient for me right now.
One of the things that I often ask leaders is, What kept you up at night early in your career?
Yeah.
And what keeps you up at night now?
Oh, early in my career. Early in my career, it was always, am I doing enough? And so I wasn't a big sleeper for a long time, and that was like a source of pride, which again, silly. But am I doing enough? And I would wake up in the middle of the night and think, I should have made one more spreadsheet. I should have sent 10 more emails. I should have. And taking a step back to say, like, did that actually move? That wouldn't have moved the ball for kids. Like, no one's going to read this email. It's 2 a.m. Like, who are you sending it to? But that would keep me up. It's not enough. It never felt like enough. And then you don't feel like enough. And that's a really dangerous part of being a public servant or a leader is it's a really big city, state, country, world. You're never going to do enough. But you might have contributed enough. And having that balance is really important. I think now the thing that keeps me up at night are my colleagues. It's a really divisive time. And the number of folks, I sit in this space where the right thinks I'm left and the left thinks I'm right, and then the fringes think the opposite. And it's like it's a whole thing where it's like maybe the only thing they can agree on is that like they don't know what's happening with me. But I have friends on both sides of the aisle, I have family on both sides of the aisle, and I've never felt a time where it was more divisive, and more than that, where people won't talk to each other. And we get into really tough situations where then if you're unwilling to even sit in a room or hear somebody, there's no way that you're gonna have, like, pendulum shifts, and then if you're not gonna be in the room. And part of it is you can be in the room, even if you don't like the room, but you're in the room and you get to be part of the conversation, or you can self-select out and complain about it. But you can't have everything the way that you want it, exactly how you want it. And that was really hard for people to understand. And I will say something, and my mom still kind of cringes a little bit. Putting aside anything else, I am very proud at the opportunity to have served 50 million kids. I'm very, very proud about that. And I'm proud to have been able to, whether it was in Delaware or in Texas or in Tennessee or in Sacramento or federal government, to be in rooms where I could know that my seat there was about advocating for the best interest of children, period. Not politics, because my politics are kids. Like, that's what I care about. And I will say, when it was in Delaware, I had a lot of people who didn't understand while I was working with like the Bidens, because at the time, Bo was there and Governor Markell, and certainly a lot of people who didn't understand why I accepted a job with Governor Lee or the nomination from President Trump when I was informed that that had happened. And in my head, I was like, yeah, I can understand why that's hard, because style and politics and all of that is really, really messy and really, really hard. And I'm gonna handle that between myself and the voting box, just like everybody else. And I can be in a room, whether it's any of those states or cities or feds, and be able to say that I am there with Sean Harper in mind. And I don't know if anyone else is going to be. Maybe they are, but if they're not, someone needs to be. And I know that at least there's one person there who's only caring about kids and nobody else. And I will sacrifice my reputation and my time all day long for that. Those have been really, really hard lessons, and I'm very proud of the decisions that I've made in terms of stepping into some of those fires. And just, I think the biggest thing I would say to young folks is say yes. California, Delaware, Maryland, Texas. People like, how many states have you lived in? I'm like, I don't know. I did student teaching in New York. I love New York. But it's just because when there's an opportunity and you just say yes and believe in yourself.
Thank you, Penny. That definitely, even as you were saying it, I'm sitting here. Yes, it is. I talked about this earlier, that it's a skill to be able to do what you're talking about, to go into whatever room it is and stay focused on your values, who you are, and what you're there for, and not pay attention to the noise that sometimes stops leaders from being able to be that focused. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, there was a story from when I was a commissioner. There were some folks who were coming to visit Tennessee. And I love Tennessee. My kids want to stay. I want to, say I love the state. I'm a Californian, but I'm a Tennessean by choice. And we were going to 2 districts. And so we were in West Tennessee, and we were doing a school visit in Memphis, near the area where my son was born. And then we went to rural Tennessee, and they were from a very, very different part of the country. And we went to Memphis, and it was a great school visit. It felt really good, and everyone was really comfortable and happy, and we had a good old time, and a lot of good friends there. And then we went to rural Tennessee, and right on the other side of the school line was like the most enormous Confederate flag they'd ever seen in their life. And I mean, I didn't know that when I was going to the school, but I hadn't been to that school before. And they were like, oh, we can't go in. I was like, well, you know, like we said that we were coming and we're going to go in because that's what we're doing here. And there was a lot of fear and a lot of angst and stress. And we had a whole conversation about, like, I promise you, when you walk in that door, they will treat you like family. We are walking into the school building because there are 400 children in this building who are being educated, and we are here to make sure they are getting an excellent education and talk about what that means for them, because they have 400 children. And we walked in, and just as expected, it was people who deeply care about their children being happy, healthy, successful, and safe. And that was the same conversation we had in Memphis as we did in that elementary school. And ultimately, when we talked about it afterwards, I said, look, there's a lot of things that happen around the edges, and people who are from very rural communities who go to big cities like New York feel the same kind of intimidation for different reasons. It's unfamiliar territory, and there's lots of history about what's right and wrong and shouldn't be there and should. But ultimately, those are other people's conversations for today, because today we're walking in the school building and we're making sure kids get a good education. And that is what I'm focused on. And like that for me was always a super important moment, because it was a blockade to those 400 kids. And I will be really honest, for a long time, that was a big mental hurdle for me. But those kids deserved people to go into that building and fight for them, just like they did in Memphis. And that was, I think, for forevermore, because none of my kids look alike. It's like one of those symbolic moments of, it's just got to be about kids. And there's a lot of other problems and a lot of other things we have to fix in this country. But the one thing we can't argue about is whether every single child deserves access to an excellent education, period.
Penny, this conversation has been a gift, and there's been so many stories and things that I'm going to be sitting with. One of the things that we like to do on the podcast is also give folks some tangible things to walk away from, or resources or things that you use. So I'd love to know, is there a habit, a tool, a resource, or even a mindset that you swear by these days to get you through?
Eleanor Roosevelt talks about, like, you can wish, it's like wishing and planning. And so I think I go into every week with a very clear plan of what I'm going to do, and then contingencies. So I think a prioritized list is has always been my go-to. But the gift that I've given myself of the last maybe 4 or 5 years is, what is a win this week? Like, what is the one thing that I have to win if I'm going to feel like this week was worth it? And it can't be 2, it can't be 10, and it has to be tangible, that's winnable. But like, this is my win. And it just keeps me very, very focused. And it's usually something that's going to take multiple days. It's, aggregates to something. But then at the end of the week, when we sit around the dinner table and I ask my kids, like, what's your win? We all have one. And at least it's something to hold on to keep you going. And I think that oftentimes in this work, it's really, really hard to find wins, because everyone's so excited about telling you your losses that you need to have something where you're like, nope, we're still winning. Yep, we're still winning. It's baseball stats, not basketball stats. So that's what my ops person used to tell me. We're going for baseball.
We're sort of wrapping up here, but one question that I'm always curious to ask leaders is, if you could go back and speak to 23-year-old Penny, what would you say to her?
The only regrets that I have are always missed opportunities. A parent in Memphis called me sobbing because her son was having a really hard time in school, bullied, threats, things like that. And she had done absolutely everything that she could think of to get him into a safe environment, walking to and from school and at school. And it was one of those things where I was going through the list of options, and I said, I don't know what to do. I can make calls, I can try to encourage, but she'd done every single thing. And it was the most helpless feeling to say, like, I'm supposed to be running education for the state of Tennessee, and I cannot get this child into a different environment where they can be safe. And that the child had he did not have a good outcome, let's put it that way. And it sits with me all the time. And I was like, if I had pushed just a little bit harder on this or on that, and you can't live in that space because then it's just a lifetime of regrets. But if I could go back to my 23-year-old self, I would say from the beginning, learn from that lesson. And that lesson for me was, it's always how, not if. So my whole career from then has been how, not if, how, not if. And I would have told my 23-year-old self, push harder for the how every single step of the way. There's always a solution to the problem. It's just how hard you're going to push through to find that solution. And there's nothing too small when it has to do with the child.
So then let's look forward. When you think about the legacy that you want to leave, what do you hope people will remember about your leadership?
I hope that people don't remember my name around the things that stick. I hope that my leadership is such that people have taken ownership over the things that were planted so that they believe deeply that it is their own. And I think that the best thing that I can do is not ever have it be, well, when Commissioner Schwinn was there, or when, so-and-so, she did this, or she started this program. I hope people forget everything about the fact that it was me who was there doing it, and really understand that it was them who took ownership over the opportunity for themselves and made it something bigger and better than I ever could have imagined, because they kept going with it. So I think the real legacy is to not be remembered, because that means that you had staying power.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest gift I can give kids.
That continuity is the whole point of legacy.
The whole thing.
Yep.
It's the whole thing.
Penny, thank you. This has been such an honest, and I so appreciate just the open sharing of stories and things that have shaped your leadership, which is really what this podcast is all about. So thank you so much for being here. I know that this resonated for me. It's resonated for those of us here in this room, and I know it'll resonate for those listening as well.
Yeah. We always explore on the podcast how leadership is complex and it's imperfect. It's messy. And we've been talking about that here at the Courageous Leaders Conference as well. And so I think that what we've kind of come back to over and over again is that leadership is human. And so thank you so much for coming on and showing your human self from Sacramento and then all of the places in between in your leadership. And to everyone in the room, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for being a part of the Courageous Leadership Conference. For everyone who will be tuning in later, we thank you for spending time with us in this conversation too. And hope everyone remembers that leadership is as much about the questions as the answers. So take care until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Leaders Table. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information about Lee, you can visit us online at wearelee.org.